President Biden is now the first president to commemorate Indigenous Peoples Day. On Friday, he issued the first ever presidential proclamation marking the day. It will be observed on October 11th, along with Christopher Columbus Day. It is the most significant federal effort yet to refocus the holiday to the history and culture of Native Americans. The president issued an earlier proclamation for Columbus Day. However, he also said he acknowledged the violence and harm Christopher Columbus and other European explorers brought to the Americas. Susan Faircloth wrote about the significance of Indigenous Peoples Day in a recent piece in The Conversation. She's a professor and the director of the School of Education at Colorado State University. She's also a member of the Coharie tribe of North Carolina. Welcome, Susan. So tell us how you're feeling about President Biden's proclamation.
So thank you. Before I say that, I would like to say that I am honored to join tonight's broadcast from the traditional homelands of the Cheyenne, the Ute Mountain, and the Arapaho peoples. And I think it's really critically important to situate land and the places on which Indigenous peoples have lived and traveled. So today for me has been a moment of mixed emotions. We've been waiting for more than 200 years since the founding of the United States for the federal government to acknowledge a federal day named as Indigenous Peoples Day. At the same time, it's been a momentous occasion for the president to also issue a proclamation about Columbus Day. And in both of those proclamations, he's acknowledged the history of the founding of this nation and of the colonization of the Americas and the impact that that's had on Indigenous peoples. So it's been quite the historic, momentous, and emotional day.
And Susan, as you say, it's been hundreds of years in the making. Walk us through the meaning behind Indigenous Peoples Day and how it actually came to fruition.
So thank you for that question. You know, given the diversity of Indigenous peoples across the United States and across the Americas, you might get a slightly different telling of that history of the origin of Indigenous Peoples Day. But if you trace the history back, the history that's written down, we know that in the 1970s and 80s, there were movements across the United States to increase the awareness of Indigenous peoples and movements to increase recognition of our rights and our status as sovereign nations. And then in the 1990s, early 1990, there was a movement by the United Nations to make a proclamation on the rights of Indigenous peoples. And then in 1990, South Dakota became the first state to officially recognize what was then referred to as Native Americans Day. And since then, across the nation, more than a dozen states have officially recognized Indigenous Peoples Day, either as a replacement of Columbus Day or in addition to Columbus Day.
I want to ask you about that because obviously President Biden has them acknowledged simultaneously. And a little bit of history, Christopher Columbus became a symbol of Italian-American pride during a period of anti-Italian discrimination in the U.S. But I'm wondering if you feel that the two holidays are actually able to occupy the same space.
You know, I think that's a very complex question. And I think it's critically important to have conversations with the members of the Italian-American community to get their perspective on the establishment and the celebration of Columbus Day. So I can only speak from the perspective of an Indigenous person. For me, I really want today and on October 11th, which is the day that the president has proclaimed as Indigenous Peoples Day, I really want to center on Indigenous peoples and what this day means for us. And for us, it's a recognition of the atrocities that our communities, our tribes, our people have endured since the arrival of Columbus and other Europeans in the Americas. And in spite of what Indigenous peoples have endured, we have survived, and in many cases, we're thriving. And so I really want the proclamation and my comments on that to really focus on what it means for us as Indigenous peoples. And at the same time, I think it's important to have those similar conversations with Italian Americans to get their perspective on ways in which the two holidays can be reconciled, and at the same time, how can we tell and honor the histories that go along with those holidays.
And Susan, you're also an educator. Hoping you
Yes.
can tell us about your assessment of how we have our shortcomings and how Native American history and culture is being taught in our schools and ways in which it can be improved.
Right. So I can talk about that from three perspectives. One, as an American Indian person and a member of the Coharie tribe of North Carolina, and having gone through my entire schooling experience, kindergarten through 12th grade, never having an American Indian or Alaska Native teacher, and the impact that that had on me and the way in which it helped to shape who I thought I could be and who I wanted to be. Because I think it was very detrimental to my education to not have the ability to engage with Native teachers outside of an American Indian education program that provided cultural and other supports. I can also speak to this question from the perspective of a parent, the parent of an 11-year-old Native child who's just entered middle school. And as a parent, my husband and I have had to repeatedly have conversations with schools about the way in which Native and Indigenous peoples are either taught about in schools in ways that are not culturally or historically accurate, or the ways in which Native and Indigenous peoples are excluded from the curriculum and in schools. And then I can also talk about this from the perspective of an educator of future teachers and principals, and the director of a school of education. And it's really incumbent upon us, those of us who prepare future educators, to ensure that our graduates and future teachers have the knowledge and skills and understanding to be able to teach history in ways that are accurate, even when that accuracy evokes emotions, and even when there's controversy around that history and around the telling of that history.
Susan Faircloth, thank you so much for coming on and helping us mark Indigenous Peoples Day. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.